This is immediately following the death of Onias. Menelaus, the brother of that wicked Simon the Benjamite, usurped the high priesthood from Jason, who usurped it from Onias. Simon attempted to usurp it from Onias, but was unsuccessful. So we're looking at a time period where the high priesthood has been compromised. All right, the priesthood has been compromised, and therefore righteousness is fading away, and therefore affliction is coming upon the Israelites. That's what we are about to read about. Affliction is coming upon Jerusalem. That's what we're about to read about. But we read a little bit about it last week. We'll get into more detail here, and we will also, Lord's will, we'll get to see at least the beginnings of the resistance to the evil. All right, and that's where the Maccabees come in. But without any further ado, again, this is immediately following the death of Onias. Menelaus, that wicked Menelaus, is the high priest. All right, unjustly. All right, he's unjustly the high priest. He just promised all these Greeks a bunch of money, and that's why they give him the high priesthood. He did not get ordained of God. He was ordained by these wicked Greeks. All right, so this is immediately following the death of Onias. I'm going to pick up with 2 Maccabees 5:1. About the same time, Antiochus prepared his second voyage into Egypt. And then it happened that through all the city, meaning all throughout Jerusalem, for the space almost of 40 days, there were seen horsemen running in the air in cloth of gold and armed with lances like a band of soldiers. So all the people of Jerusalem could look up in the sky and see the armies of heaven. That was a vision that the Lord was giving them, saying, look, you do have a God fighting for you. Because morale was very low, the people were going through so much affliction, and they were losing hope. But the Lord showed them, look, there are people fighting for you. All right, and if no one else is, then God is. All right, verse 3, and the troops of horsemen in array, encountering and running one against another, with shaking of shields and multitude of pikes and drawing of swords and casting of darts and glittering of golden ornaments and harness of all sorts. Wherefore every man prayed that the apparition might turn to good. You see that right there. So the people knew it was a vision. They were hoping and praying that it meant good things to come. And we'll read about it does, but not before a bunch of bad things happened first. All right, verse 5. Now, when there was gone forth a false rumor as though Antiochus had been dead, Jason took at the least 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city. And they that were upon the walls being put back, and the city at length taken, Menelaus fled into the castle. But Jason slew his own citizens without mercy, not considering that to get the day of them of his own nation would be a most unhappy day for him, but thinking they had been his enemies and not his countrymen whom he conquered. Right? Jason and Menelaus, neither one of them cared about the people. They just wanted rulership. They just wanted position. They wanted authority. All right, so here comes Jason with his band of wicked men against Menelaus and his band of wicked men. But really what Jason is doing, he's just slaughtering innocent people. All right, he's just attacking Jerusalem. Howbeit, for all this he obtained not the principality, but at the last received shame for the reward of his treason, and fled again into the country of the Ammonites. Right? Nobody would house him in the land of Israel because he was the devil. All right, and everybody knew it. In the end, therefore, he had an unhappy return, being accused before Aretas, the king of the Arabians, fleeing from city to city, pursued of all men, hated as a forsaker of the laws, and being had in abomination as an open enemy of his country and countrymen, he was cast out into Egypt. Right? So nobody wanted him. The other nations did not want him. They said, look, if you're going to treat your own people this way, how are you going to treat us? Right? So nobody liked Jason at that point because they saw his wickedness. His true colors were revealed. All right. Thus, he that had driven many out of their country perished in a strange land, retiring to the Lacedaemonians, and thinking there to find secure by reason of his kindred, right? Because it was Israelites in Lacedaemonian, or in Lacedaemonia, Sparta, in other words. All right. So all those Spartans, that was Israelites, right? It tells you right here, the Lacedaemonians were the kindred of Jason. Jason being the brother of Onias, the high priest. And he that had cast out many unburied had none to mourn for him, nor any solemn funerals at all, nor sepulchre with his fathers, right? Because he died in Greece. All right. But yeah, you read in the scriptures, like when Josiah died, there was a great mourning, right? When Moses died, there was a great mourning. When Joshua died, there was a great mourning throughout the land, right? When Jacob died, there was a great mourning in not only Egypt, but when we carried his body into Canaan, like there was a great mourning, right? So Jason had no such mourning because everybody was glad that he died. All right, I'm just telling you straight. All right. Now, when this that was done came to the king's car, he thought that Judea had revolted, whereupon removing out of Egypt in a furious mind, he took the city by force of arms, right? So when he's seen that Jason came against Jerusalem, Antiochus just heard rumor that, Jerusalem is rebelling, or the Jews are rebelling. So he came through with force and commanded his men of war not to spare such as they met, and to slay such as went up upon the houses, right? So he said, go through and kill everybody. Thus, there was killing of young and old, making away of men, right, taking them away. Women and children, slaying of virgins and infants. They didn't spare anybody. They came through, killed all the innocents. All right. And there were destroyed within the space of 3 whole days 80,000. That's 80,000. Whereof 40,000 were slain in the conflict, no fewer sold than slain. You see that right there? So at least 40,000 were sold as slaves to the surrounding areas as well, to Greece, to Egypt, to everywhere else in the Middle East, right? Yet was he not content with this, but presumed to go into the most holy temple of all the world, Menelaus, that traitor to the laws, and his own country being his guide, right? So when Antiochus showed up, Menelaus is like, my good friend Antiochus, let me bring you into the temple. Like the devil he was, and taking the holy vessels with polluted hands and with profane hands, pulling down things that were dedicated by other kings to the augmentation and glory and honor of the place, he gave them away, right? So when Onias brought men in, he would not let them into the hallowed areas. He would not let them touch the sanctified things with polluted hands, and people would give him gifts, and he would store them in the treasury or hang up a banner, whatever they give him, right? But here we see it done in the exact opposite way, all defiled, all unclean, all wicked, all right, and just letting this profane man come in and do whatever he wanted to in the temple of the Lord. And so haughty was Antiochus in mind that he considered not that the Lord was angry for a while for the sins of them that dwelt in the city, and therefore his eye was not upon the place. You see that right there? Verse 18, for had they not been formerly wrapped in many sins, this man, as soon as he had come, had forthwith been scourged and put back from his presumption, as Heliodorus was, whom Seleucus the king sent to view the treasury. You see that right there? So that's why it's important that you know that history we read about last week with Heliodorus. That's why the scribe here mentioned it, because it's a good preamble to what happened with Antiochus, because it's the opposite situation. When God was fighting for the people, he literally came down and fought for the people and did not let the wicked come and do whatever with his land and his holy things. But when God is not fighting for the people, that's when the Israelites fall. All right. Nevertheless, God did not choose the people for the place's sake, but the place for the people's sake. You see that right there, and that's a good scripture to use out of context, because that is the context in and of itself, right? And therefore the place itself that was partaker with them of the adversity that happened to the nation did afterward communicate in the benefits sent from the Lord. And as it was forsaken in the wrath of the Almighty, so again, the great Lord being reconciled, it was set up with all glory, right? So he's just touching on the history there, how the land was defiled when the Canaanites were in, and then the Lord brought in the Israelites. Now the land was holy. Then the Israelites fell off. God took the Israelites out of the land because he was always dealing with the people before the place, all right? And the thing that made the place so special is when the people were doing what the Lord asked us to do, all right? And came from Persia. God dedicated the land again by rebuilding the temple and doing things in holiness. And that's how you got to the time of Onias, where everybody knew what was going on. Seleucus the king at that time knew what was going on with Onias as far as being a righteous man, and you can't just run up in here and do whatever. He found that out with Heliodorus. All right. So reconciled it was set up with all glory. So when Antiochus had carried out of the temple 1,800 talents, he departed in all haste unto Antiochia, weening in his pride to make the land navigable and the sea passable by foot. Such was the haughtiness of his mind. You see that right there? So Antiochus thought he was the man, right? He's like, I can sail a boat on land and I can walk on water. That's why he surnamed himself Epiphanes. Epiphanes means God manifested on earth. That was his mindset. He thought he was God. All right. I don't think we're going to get to the death of Antiochus this week, but it's going to be great when we do. All right. He left governors to vex the nation. At Jerusalem, Philip for his country of Phrygian, and for manners more barbarous than he that set him there. And at Gerizim, Andronicus, and besides Menelaus, who worse than all the rest, bear a heavy hand over the citizens, having a malicious mind against his countrymen the Jews. Right, that wicked wretch Menelaus. He sent also that detestable ringleader Apollonius with an army of 22,000, commanding him to slay all those that were in their best age, and to sell the women and the younger sword. You see that right there? So the men who would have been able to fight, he killed all them, and then just took the women captive, sold them into slavery. All right, and the children. Who coming to Jerusalem and pretending peace, did forbear till the holy day of the Sabbath. When taking the Jews keeping holy day, he commanded his men to arm themselves. So he slew all them that were gone to the celebrating of the Sabbath, and running through the city with weapons slew great multitudes. But Judas Maccabeus, with 9 others, or thereabout, withdrew himself into the wilderness, and lived in the mountains after the manner of beasts, with his company, who fed on herbs continually, lest they should be partakers of the pollution. All right, so we're going to stop at this chapter here, and we're going to jump back over to 1 Maccabees chapter 2. We're going to get a little bit more into, because it didn't just start with Judas, it started with Judas' dad, Mattathias. So, and we're going to get into more detail over there about this, who is this, Apollonius, came to fight against the Jews on the Sabbath. All right. So this is 1 Maccabees 2. It said, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joram, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. Right. So Modin would have been a suburb of Jerusalem. And he had 5 sons: Johanan called Caddis, Simon called Thassi, Judas, who was called Maccabeus, Eleazar called Alvaron, and Jonathan, whose surname was Aphas. And when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers. Right? So Mattathias is mourning because he saw the greatness of the city, right, during the days of the high priest Onias. Right? Her temple is become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets. Her young men with the sword of the enemy. Right? That's what we were just reading about. Mattathias sees all this, and he's in mourning. What nation hath not had a part in her kingdom and gotten of her spoils? All her ornaments are taken away. Of a free woman she has become a bondslave. And behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty and our glory is laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned it. Right? That's what Antiochus did. He went into the temple and he profaned it. To what end, therefore, shall we live any longer? Then Mattathias and his sons rent their clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn very sore. And see, that's what we would do in mourning. We would change from our good-looking outfits, our good fits, into sackcloth. In the meanwhile, the king's officers, such as compelled the people to revolt, came into the city Modin, and to make them sacrifice, right? Sacrifice to Jupiter or to Zeus, whatever they called him. And when many of Israel came unto them, Mattathias also and his sons came together. Then answered the king's officers and said to Mattathias on this wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in the city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. They said, look, we know you're an older guy. We know you have sons and brothers who really respect you. You're a leader in the city. Now, therefore, come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment. like as all the heathen have done, yea, and the men of Judah also, and such as remain at Jerusalem. So shalt thou and thy house be in the number of the king's friends, and thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold and many rewards. You see that right there? You know what he's saying? He's saying, sell your soul, Mattathias. Go completely against what the laws of God say, and do what the Greeks said to do. Look, the people in Jerusalem, they already doing it. You here at Modin, you're one of the last few holdouts. Then Mattathias answered and spake with a loud voice, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away everyone from the religion of their fathers and give consent to his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. Right? So Mattathias, he stood boldly for the Lord. He said, I don't care what you're willing to give me. I don't care if everybody on the planet turns against God. Me and my sons, we will not. We will obey God before men. All right? We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or the left. Now, when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. So, Mattathias giving his speech, rousing the people up to keep the commandments of God. And then here come this wicked Jew. All right? This wicked black man. You have a righteous black man standing up and saying, look, we ain't gonna do that. Then you have this wicked one come through here. He said, I'll do it. He said, I want to be one of the king's friends. I want the silver and gold. He said, to hell with God. Which thing when Mattathias saw, he was inflamed with zeal, and his reins trembled. Neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. He said it right there. So Mattathias couldn't take it anymore. He said, I'm tired of the wickedness. Killed the man. And we know that idolatry in the old covenant, if you get found worshiping an idol, God said put you to death. So that's what Mattathias did right here. Remember, this is still the old covenant. Christ had not come yet. So he was just in that judgment. Also the king's commissioner who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time. And the altar he pulled down. Right? So also the guy who was trying to compel him, right? The Greek officer, he killed him too. All right? And the profane altar that he set up. Thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like as Phinehas did unto Zambri, the son of Salom. And you read about that in Numbers chapter 25, I believe. And Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled to the mountains and left all that ever they had in the city. And according to 2 Maccabees chapter 5, that was around 10 people. That was around 10 people. We know him and his sons, that's 6 people, so there's only 3 others of their family came with him. Let me make sure everything going all right. It appears to be okay. All praise to the Most High. We dropped off a little bit, but it seems to be going all right. Let's keep reading. They left all that ever they had in the city. Then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there. You see that right there? So it started with just Mattathias and his family, but then people started, spreading the word about how, hey, if there's Jews who's not taking this anymore? So then many went down to look for them and to dwell with them, to live with them where they run to. Both they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because afflictions increased sore upon them. They said, look, we're getting tired of this too. All right. So from there, I want to get back to this right here because we're basically caught up. I want to get into a bit more of what the Greeks were doing at this time when Mattathias and his sons. Let me read this about the Sabbath day. About the Sabbath day real quick, because that was in chapter 5. So let me read this real quick. In verse 31. Now when it was told the king's servants and the host that was at Jerusalem in the city of David that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were gone down into the secret places in the wilderness, they pursued after them a great number. And having overtaken them, they camped against them and made war against them on the Sabbath. Right? So we saw in 2 Maccabees, they pretended like they wanted peace. And then they suddenly made war with the people on the Sabbath. And they said unto them, let that which ye have done hitherto suffice. Come forth and do according to the commandment of the king, and ye shall live. They said, look, we'll spare you. We'll spare your life if you just come out and do what the Greeks say to do instead of what God says. But they said, we will not come forth, neither will we do the king's commandment to profane the Sabbath day. So then they gave them the battle with all speed. Howbeit they answered them not, neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped the places where they lay hid. Right? So they didn't even cover, they didn't try to hide themselves any further because it was the Sabbath day. They didn't want to lift any burdens. They didn't want to do any kind of work on the Sabbath day. But said, let us all die in our innocency. Heaven and earth will testify for us that you put us to death wrongfully, right? So you had some people who was in a spirit of righteousness, but they didn't fight against the Greeks. They said, look, we can be martyrs. God will fight for us. God will write this down in his books that we were martyrs for his sake. So they rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they slew them with their wives and children and their cattle to the number of 1,000 people. So it was 1,000 people that had that mindset of, look, we're not going to fight you on the Sabbath day. We don't care if you kill us. We're not doing what you say, and we're not fighting you on the Sabbath. Now when Mattathias and his friends understood hereof, they mourned for them right sore. And one of them said to another, if we all do as our brethren have done, and fight not for our lives and laws against the heathen, they will now quickly root us out of the earth. Verse 41. At that time, therefore, they decreed, saying, whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Sabbath day, we will fight against him. Neither will we die all as our brethren that were murdered in the secret places. All right. So we see here that Mattathias and his sons and the men that were gathered to them said, look, we could go that route that they went and refuse to fight on the Sabbath day. But if we do that, all our people are going to be wiped out. So we can't realistically do that. We have to fight. If they come against us on the Sabbath, we have to fight for our people, for our country, for our laws and our heritage. All right. So that's a little bit more detail about the Greeks coming against them on the Sabbath. All right. So it says, not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of God, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, and that in Gerizim, of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in that place. All right, so we know in America that they love to talk about Greek mythology. And Rome is the one who called this god Jupiter, but the Greeks called it Zeus. All right. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles. They were throwing parties in the temple of God, who dallied with harlots. They would bring hookers in there and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. The altar also was filled with profane things which the law forbiddeth. You see that right there? So they was just doing all sorts of evil in the temple of God. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. You see that right there? So if you can't call yourself a Jew, you have to call yourself a Greek or a Gentile. All right? So that's where you get that in the New Testament, where all these, where it's talking about how, we got to go to the Gentiles. That's the descendants of these Israelites who fell to the Greeks, all right, who listened to the Greeks, all right. And in the day of the king's birth every month, they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the feast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus carrying ivy. You see that right there? So there were plenty of Jews who were forced into celebrating Greek customs. All right. Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy against the Jews that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices. You see that right there? So that's what we saw in Modin, what we just read about in 1 Maccabees chapter 2. That what happened in Modin is an extension of all these policies. All right. And whoso would not conform themselves to the manner of the Gentiles should be put to death. Then might a man have seen the present misery. You see that right there? So if you didn't do what the Greeks said to do, they would kill you. All right? If you didn't become a Greek in lifestyle, they would kill you. That's what they did to the Jews. All right? For there were 2 women brought, who had circumcised their children, whom when they had openly led round about the city, the babes handing at their breasts, they cast them down headlong from the wall. You see that right there? So they were killing babies. All right? That's what they did. And others that had run together into caves nearby to keep the Sabbath day secretly, being discovered by Philip, were all burnt together, because they made a conscience to help themselves for the honor of the most sacred day. You see that right there? So, and again, that's what we read in 1 Maccabees chapter 2 and also in the previous chapter, about people who would keep the Sabbath day, and then the Greeks would come find them and kill them. Now I beseech those that read this book that they be not discouraged for these calamities, but that they judge those punishment not to be for destruction, but for a chastening of our nation. You see that right there? So even the scribe writing this, he said, look, don't become depressed by this. Recognize that this is Leviticus 26. This is Deuteronomy 28. This is judgment from God for sin. That's what this is. And as he said in the previous chapter, if the people would have remained righteous, then it would have been like Heliodorus all over again. The Greeks come in and try to do whatever they want. God sent down some angels to mess them up, all right, to beat them up, all right. For it is a token of his great goodness when wicked doers are not suffered any long time, but forthwith punished. For not as with other nations, whom the Lord patiently forbeareth to punish, till they come to the fullness of their sins. That's what he did with Canaan, all right. He said, the fullness of their sin is not quite yet. That's what he told Abraham. He said, look, the fullness of their sin is not quite yet with Canaan. I'm going to wait another 400 years. Then your children are going to come, your descendants are going to come, and then wipe out the Canaanites. All right. But with the Israelites, he deals specifically and quickly. All right. That's what you read in Amos chapter 3. He said, you only have I known, so I will punish you for your sins. For not as with other nations, whom the Lord patiently forbeareth to punish, till they be come to the fullness of their sins, so dealeth he with us. Lest that being come to the height of sin, afterwards he should take vengeance of us. Right? So God deals with us quickly and swiftly because again, he loves us because of our forefathers' sake. He said, look, I'm going to make a covenant with you, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. All right. And then later on with Moses, I'm going to make a covenant with you, the 12 tribes of Israel, for your father's sake. And therefore he never withdraweth his mercy from us. And though he punish with adversity, yet doth he never forsake his people. All right. So even though we may go through things like here in America, all right. And if you read here in the Maccabees, it's very similar to what the European colonists did to not only what you call the indigenous, but also the black slaves, right? That's how we can say these are the 2 kingdoms of Israel, because it's what you read in the Bible, all right? But let this that we had, but let this that we had spoken be for a warning unto us. And now will we come to the declaring of the matter in a few words, all right? Eleazar, one of the principal scribes, an aged man, and of a well-favored countenance, was constrained to open his mouth and to eat swine's flesh. Right. So you had Eleazar, one of the elders of the people, was coerced to eat pork. All right. But he, choosing rather to die gloriously than to live stained with such an abomination, spit it forth, and came of his own accord to the torment. All right, so if you refuse to keep the king's commandment, he would torture you. If you didn't listen to what Antiochus said to do, he would torture you. All right. As it behooved them to come, that are resolute to stand out against such things as are not lawful for love of life to be tasted. You see that right there? So that's how our forefathers were about pork. These days, the people just eat pork like it's nothing. But the Bible says that the elder men of that time, who were keeping the commandments of God, would rather die than eat a pork chop, than eat a ham sandwich. All right. But they that had the charge of that wicked feast, for the old acquaintance they had with the man, taking him aside, besought him to bring flesh of his own provision, such as was lawful for him to use, and to make as if he did eat of the flesh taken from the sacrifice commanded by the king. Right. So even the Greeks were like, look, you don't actually have to eat pork. Bring you some turkey, or bring you some chicken or something. Bring you something that's lawful, and just pretend like you're eating pork. Bring you some beef and pretend it is pork. That in so doing he might be delivered from death, and for the old friendship with them find favor. Right. So Eleazar, he was a cool dude. He was a chill guy. So they were like, look, you don't actually have to eat the pork. Look, just bring some of your own meat. Pretend like you're eating pork. We'll let you slide. We'll let it slide. But he began to consider discreetly, and as becometh his age, he thought about it. He was like, can I get away with this? And the excellency of his ancient years, and the honor of his gray head, whereon was come, and his most honest education from a child, or rather the holy law made and given by God. Therefore he answered accordingly, and willed them straightways to send him to the grave. He said, I'd rather die than even pretend to eat pork at this point. For it becometh not our age, said he, in any wise to dissemble, whereby many young persons might think that Eleazar, being 80 years old and 10, that's 90. Eleazar was a 90-year-old man, were now gone to a strange religion. You see that right there? So he was like, look, I got to set an example for these young men. All right, he said, I've lived okay, excuse me. Let's keep reading. And so they, through mine hypocrisy and desire to live a little time and a moment longer, should be deceived by me, and I get a stain to my own age and make it abominable. You see that right there? So he's like, look, I've lived a long life. Why should I deceive the people now? Why should I make the people think now that it's a good idea to follow the Greeks? Why would I set them a bad example now? I've only ever set forth a good example in my 90 years. All right? For though for the present time I should be delivered from the punishment of men, yet should I not escape the hand of the Almighty, neither alive nor dead. And this mentality of, oh, that may be lawful for me. It would have been completely lawful for Eleazar to bring in some turkey and other people around him say it's pork, right? But he said it's not expedient. This is what Paul was talking about. He said all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. A lot of what you do is to set an example for others. Eleazar understood that. All right? He said, look, God's going to judge me if I make the people think it's all right to do what the Greeks do. Wherefore now, manfully changing this life, I will show myself such a one as my age requireth. He said, I'm going to stand on the laws of God and leave a notable example to such as be young to die willingly and courageously for the honorable and holy laws. And when he had said these words, immediately he went to the torment, right? Because they didn't want to hear that. So they took him to the torture. They that led him, changing the good will, they bare him a little before into hatred, because the foresaid speeches proceeded, as they thought, from a desperate mind. All right, it was like, what's wrong with this dude? He won't even eat this ham sandwich. He'd rather die than eat this ham sandwich. What's wrong with this guy? It's because some people will stand for the laws of God no matter what. But when he was ready to die with stripes, he groaned and said, it is manifest unto the Lord, that had the holy knowledge, that whereas I might have been delivered from death, I now endure sore pains in the body by being beaten, but in soul am well content to suffer these things because I fear him. He said, I fear God more than anything you can do to my body. And thus this man died, leaving his death for an example of a noble courage and a memorial of virtue, not only unto young men, but unto all his nation. You see that right there? So all praises to the Most High for a brother like Eleazar. A 90-year-old would rather die than become like the Greeks and be tortured. He was being tortured here. Speaking of, we got one more story of this torture that they were doing. And this is the mother with the 7 children. With the 7, they're like grown men at this point, or like teenage years at least. They have some cognitive abilities. All right, so this is 2 Maccabees chapter 7. I'm going to start with verse 1. It came to pass also that 7 brethren with their mother were taken and compelled by the king against the law to take swine's flesh, and were tormented with scourges and whips. All right, so they were beat with whips. But one of them that spake first said thus, what wouldest thou ask or learn of us? We are ready to die rather than transgress the law of our fathers. You see that right there? So it doesn't even tell you what happened to the man, the father. Maybe she was a single mother, and the dad was wicked and just left. But it's seven sons. So more than likely, the man was killed in the siege, or in a siege of Jerusalem, or in a. It doesn't say they were from Jerusalem, but it's very possible that the husband of this woman was killed by the Greek army or officers. You know what I mean? So let's keep reading. They're all answering, saying, "Look, we'd rather die than break the laws of God." Then the king, being in a rage, commanded pans and cauldrons to be made hot. So he's getting very creative in the torture. He's boiling pots. Which forthwith being heated, he commanded to cut out the tongue of him that spake first, and to cut off the utmost parts of his body, all his appendages. He's cutting off all his appendages. All right. The rest of his brethren and his mother looking on. Right. So I don't know if you've ever seen the Clockwork Orange, but they put you in a chair and like tape your eyeballs and stuff like that. They're making them watch. All right. Now, when he was thus maimed in all his members, he commanded him, being yet alive, to be brought to the fire and to be fried in the pan. And as the vapor of the pan was for a good space dispersed, they exhorted one another with the mother to die manfully, saying thus, "The Lord God looketh upon us, and in truth hath comfort in us, as Moses in his song, which witnessed to their faces, declared, saying, and he shall be comforted in his servants." So when the first was dead after this number, they brought the second to make him a mocking stock. So when they had pulled off the skin of his head with the hair, they scalped him. They asked him, "Wilt thou eat before thou be punished throughout every member of thy body?" But he answered in his own language. So he ain't even speaking to him in the Greek. They're speaking to him in the Greek. He understands what they're saying, but he's not speaking back to them in Greek. But he answered in his own language and said, "No." Wherefore he also received the next torment in order as the former did. Right? So they are torturing these young men. And when he was at the last gasp, he said, "Thou like a fury takest us out of this present life, but the King of the world shall raise us up, who have died for his laws unto everlasting life." They said, "Look, we're martyrs now. Praise God. You're doing this right now, but God is ruling over all things." After him, after him was the third made a mocking stock, and when he was required, he put out his tongue, and that right soon, holding forth his hands manfully, and said courageously, "These I had from heaven, and for his laws I despised them, and from him I hope to receive them again." So that's similar to what Christ said about how if your right hand offend thee, cut it off, right? So this man said, he stuck his tongue out, he's like, "I got all this from God, but if it means that I lose them to serve God, I hate them," right? Cut them off. I don't want them. All right. "I despise them, and from him I hope to receive them again," right? So he said, "God can bring me back." Insomuch that the king and they that were with him marveled at the young man's courage, for that he nothing regarded the pains. Right? So he didn't. It looked like he didn't even care about the pains. Obviously, he felt it, but he's still standing up courageously for God and his commandments. Now, when this man was dead also, they tormented and mangled the fourth in like manner. So when he was ready to die, he said thus, "It is good, being put to death by men, to look for hope from God to be raised up again by him. As for thee, thou shalt have no resurrection to life." They said, "Look, y'all don't get what we're promised. Y'all don't understand what we're promised because you won't receive the promises." Afterward, they brought the fifth also and mangled him. Then looked he unto the king and said, "Thou hast power over men. Thou art corruptible. Thou doest what thou wilt. Yet think not that our nation is forsaken of God. But abide a while, and behold his great power, how he will torment thee and thy seed." You see that right there? So now these men are prophesying against Antiochus, saying, "Look, you're torturing us. God is making note of it, and he will torture you." All right? And your seed. After him also they brought the sixth, who being ready to die said, "Be not deceived without cause, for we suffer these things for ourselves, having sinned against our God. Therefore marvelous things are done unto us. But think not thou that takest in hand to strive against God, that thou shalt escape unpunished." You see that right there? So they have, again, they're starting to prophesy against Antiochus. They say, "Look, we're going through this because of the sins of our nation. We understand that. Don't think you're going to go unpunished. All right? But the mother was marvelous above all. So just you got to think, this mother has been sitting here being forced to watch all her children be killed before her. All right? Tortured and then killed before her very eyes. But the mother was marvelous above all and worthy of honorable memory. For when she saw her 7 sons slain within the space of one day, she bare it with a good courage because of the hope that she had in the Lord. Yea, she exhorted every one of them in her own language, right, in the Hebrew, filled with courageous spirits, and stirring up her womanish thoughts with a manly stomach. She said unto them, she said, look, I got to speak to these young men in a courageous way. I cannot tell you how ye came into my womb, for I neither gave you breath nor life, neither was it I that formed the members of every one of you. So, like, women these days, they'll be like, I gave you life, I can take it away from you. She's not like that. She's a godly woman. She said, look, I didn't put you in my stomach. I did not form you. It was God that did it. So give glory to him. But doubtless, the creator of the world, who formed the generation of man, and found out the beginning of all things, will also of his own mercy give you breath of life. Give you breath and life again, as ye now regard not your own self for his law's sake. She said, look, God can bring you back. God can give you eternal life. So stand up for him. Be courageous for him. Now Antiochus, thinking himself despised and suspecting it to be a reproachful speech, I wonder why he thinks he's despised here, while the youngest was yet alive, did not only exhort him by words, but also assured him with oaths that he would make him both rich and a happy man, if he would turn from the law of his fathers. All right. So this is the youngest. So this is probably a young teen, or like maybe 15, maybe 16. All right. And that also he would take him for his friend and trust him with affairs. He said, I'll give you a position. I'll give you a good job. But when the young man would in no case hearken unto him, the king called his mother and exhorted her that she would counsel the young man to save his life. He said, look, don't you want to save your son? Tell him to just eat this pork. Just eat this ham sandwich I made for him. Just tell him to eat this pork chop that I got set on the table over here. That's all he got to do. And when he had exhorted her with many words, she promised him that she would counsel her son. She said, yeah, I'll talk to him. I'll talk to him. But she, bowing herself toward him, laughing the cruel tyrant to scorn, spake in her country language on this manner: O my son, have pity upon me that bare thee 9 months in my womb, and gave thee suck 3 years, and nourished thee, and brought thee up unto this age, and endured the troubles of education. You see that right there? So she said, look. First of all, she laughed, and she turned from Antiochus to her son, and laughed at Antiochus, speaking in the Hebrew so he can't understand. All right, I beseech thee, my son, look upon the heaven and the earth, and all that is therein, and consider that God made them of things that were not, and so was mankind made likewise. Right, so she said, believe in God. Look at all this. God made all this from things that did not exist beforehand, just like men. Fear not this tormentor, but being worthy of thy brethren, take thy death, that I may receive thee again in mercy with thy brethren. He said it right there. She said, I'll see you again. Take your death like a man, and we will be able to see all of each other again. All right. While she was yet speaking these words, the young man said, whom wait ye for? I will not obey the king's commandment, but I will obey the commandment of the law that was given unto our fathers by Moses. You see that right there? So he said, what are you waiting on? Torture me too. I would rather keep the commandments than do what you say. And thou, that has been the author of all mischief against the Hebrews, shall not escape the hands of God. For we suffer because of our sins. And though the living Lord be angry with us a little while for our chastening and correction, yet shall he be at one again with his servants. But thou, O godless man, and of all other most wicked, be not lifted up without a cause, nor puffed up with uncertain hopes, lifting up thy hand against the servants of God. For thou hast not yet escaped the judgment of Almighty God, who seeth all things. For our brethren, who now have suffered a short pain, are dead under God's covenant of everlasting life. But thou, through the judgment of God, shalt receive just punishment for thy pride. But I, as my brethren, offer up my body and life for the laws of our fathers, beseeching God that he would speedily be merciful unto our nation, and that thou by torments and plagues mayest confess that he alone is God. So now he's getting very specific with his prophecy against Antiochus. He said, look, you're going to beseech our God whenever he tortures you in pains. You're going to call on the name of our God. All right? Which is, okay. And that me and my brethren, with the wrath of the Almighty, which is justly brought upon our nation, may cease. All right? He said, look, and this is all going to come to an end. All right? Your rulership, this torture that you're doing to our people, it's going to stop. Then the king, being in a rage, handed him worse than all the rest, and took it grievously that he was mocked. Right? So this pissed the king off, naturally. So this man died undefiled, and put his whole trust in the Lord. Last of all, after the sons, the mother died. Let this be enough now to have spoken concerning the idolatrous feast and extreme tortures. Right? So that's where the scribe leaves off with the speaking of the tortures that happened. But let's finish up 1 Maccabees chapter 2. We might get chapter 3 in as well. All right. So let's start with verse 42. Then came there unto him a company of Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel. So again, this is Mattathias and his group that, fled Jerusalem when all this was going down. Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. The Assyrians who allied themselves with the Maccabean family later on became the Pharisees. All right. But at one point in time, the Pharisees were just keeping the commandments of God. It shows you how people can fall off, right? How groups, how camps, how churches can fall off, even though they were, righteous at one point. That's the Assyrians. They were righteous at one point during the age of the Greeks. Also, all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them and were a stay unto them. So they joined their forces and smote sinful men in their anger and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the heathen for succor, for comfort. Then Mattathias and his friends went round about and pulled down the altars, the idol altars, and what children soever they found within the coast of Israel, uncircumcised, those they circumcised valiantly. Right? So the ones that the Greeks said, you can't circumcise your children. Whenever the righteous man took the city over, they allowed the people to circumcise the children. And they circumcised them violently. They pursued also after the proud men, and the work prospered in their hand. So they recovered the law out of the hand of the Gentiles, out of the hand of the kings. Neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. You see it right there. So they didn't allow the Greeks to burn all the Bibles. And they, didn't allow the sinners to live either. Now, when the time drew near that Mattathias should die, he said unto his sons, now hath pride and rebuke gotten strength, in the time of destruction and the wrath of indignation. Now, therefore, my sons, be ye zealous for the law, and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers. Call to remembrance what acts our fathers did in their time. So shall you receive great honor and an everlasting name. So this is like Mattathias' last speech before he dies. Was not Abraham found faithful in temptation, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness? So now he's going through all the history. All right. Joseph, in the time of his distress, kept the commandment and was made Lord of Egypt. Phineas, our father, in being zealous and fervent, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Jesus, that's Joshua, for fulfilling the word, was made a judge in Israel. Caleb, for bearing witness before the congregation, received the heritage of the land. David, for being merciful, possessed the throne of an everlasting kingdom. Elias, that's Elijah, for being zealous and fervent for the law, was taken up into heaven. Ananias, Azariah, and Mishael, that's your Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 holy children, by believing were saved out of the flame. Daniel, for his innocency, was delivered from the mouth of lions. And thus consider ye throughout all ages, that none that put their trust in him shall be overcome. He said it right there. So there is hope. Fear not then the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found. Because he is returned into his dust, and his thought is come to nothing. Right? So it's like that saying, this too shall pass. Right? That's what he's saying here. All the people understood what this was about. Like, look, this is Deuteronomy 28. This is Leviticus 26. We just need to follow God, and we can, ride this on out. All right, it's going to be rough, and we're going to have to fight, but we got to do this for God's sake. Wherefore, ye my sons, be valiant and show yourselves men in behalf of the law. For by it ye shall obtain, or by it shall ye obtain glory. Right? That's the only true glory is in God. All right. And behold, I know that your brother Simon is a man of counsel. Give ear unto him always, and he shall be a father unto you. All right. So we'll read more about Simon in the latter half of the book of the Maccabees. Or first Maccabees, I should say. As for Judas Maccabeus, he had been mighty and strong, even from his youth up. Let him be your captain and fight the battle of the people. So this is why in 2 Maccabees chapter 6, or rather chapter 5, it ends with talking about Judas being the leader of the people, because this is the role that was given to him from his father Mattathias. Let him be your captain and fight the battle of the people. Take also unto you all those that observe the law, and avenge ye the wrong of your people. Recompense fully the heathen, and take heed to the commandments of the law. So he blessed them, and was gathered to his fathers. And he died in the 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchres of his fathers at Modin, and all Israel made great lamentation for him. Right, so they knew that Mattathias was a wise man, and he did get a great mourning, unlike that wicked wretch Jason. All right, so we'll try to go through this fairly quickly in 1 Maccabees chapter 3, and we'll pick up next week with chapter 4. Then his son Judas, called Maccabeus, rose up in his stead. Right, was captain over the people instead of Mattathias, and all his brethren helped him, and so did all they that held with his father, and they fought with cheerfulness the battle of Israel. So he gat his people great honor, and put on a breastplate as a giant, and girt his warlike harness about him, and he made battles protecting the host with his sword. Right, so he had that presence about him. Right, so the way that he moved, he was like a giant. Right, just how mighty he was. In his acts, he was like a lion, and like a lion's whelp roaring for his prey, like a young lion. All right, for he pursued the wicked and sought them out, and burnt up those that vexed his people. Wherefore the wicked shrunk for fear of him, and all the workers of iniquity were troubled, because salvation prospered in his hand. You see that right there? So Judah was no joke. All right, and we think of the name Judas, and we generally only associate the name Judas with that wicked Judas Iscariot who betrayed our Lord. But Judas is just a Greek way of saying Judah, right? Judah or Yehuda means God's praise. All right, so this man really embodied that. Judas Maccabeus really embodied that. All right, even though he was a Levite, he was named Judah. All right, and Maccabeus means the hammer. All right, and that's exactly what Judah was. All right, he grieved also many kings, and made Jacob glad with his acts, and his memorial is blessed forever. Moreover, he went through the cities of Judah, destroying the ungodly out of them, and turning away wrath from Israel, so that he was renowned unto the utmost part of the earth, and he received unto him such as were ready to perish. Right, so when the people lost all hope, they fled to Judah Maccabeus, because they knew that he could help them. All right. Then Apollonius gathered the Gentiles together, and a great host out of Samaria, to fight against Israel. All right, so this is when the other nations still controlled Samaria. All right, which thing when Judas perceived, he went forth to meet him, and so he smote him and slew him. Many also fell down slain, but the rest fled. Right, so this is where Apollonius died. All right. Wherefore Judas took their spoils, and Apollonius' sword also, and therewith he fought all his life long. He said, I like this sword. It's a nice sword. It's my sword now. I'm going to use it. All right, that's called the spoils of war. Now, when Saron, a prince of the army of Syria, heard say that Judas had gathered unto him a multitude and company of the faithful to go out with him to war, he said, I will get me a name and honor in the kingdom, for I will go fight with Judas and them that were with him, who despised the king's commandment. He said, look, I'm gonna get me a name. He said, the king's I'm gonna be invited to the king's palace, and I'm gonna be one of the king's friends if I go out here and kill Judas. Bad mistake. All right, so he made him ready to go up, and there went with him a mighty host of ungodly to help him, and to be avenged of the children of Israel. And when he came near to the going up of Beth Horon, Judas went forth to meet him with a small company, who, when they saw the host coming to meet them, said unto Judas, how shall we be able, being so few, to fight against so great a multitude and so strong, seeing we are ready to faint with fasting all this day? right? So the people are getting scared. They're getting weak-minded because they see that there's a big army that they got to fight against. Unto whom Judas answered, it is no hard matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few. And with the God of heaven, it is all one to deliver with a great multitude or a small company, right? So Judas was in the spirit. He said, look, the battle is not won by an army. The battle is won by God, all right? He said it makes no difference to God to use a multitude or a small company. It doesn't matter. For the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of a host, but strength cometh from heaven. They come against us in much pride and iniquity to destroy us, and our wives and children and to spoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. Wherefore the Lord himself will overthrow him before our face. And as for you, be ye not afraid of them. You see that right there? So not only could Judas fight, he could rally the people in a way that very few others ever could. All right? Now, as soon as he had left off speaking, he leapt suddenly upon them. And so Saron and his host was overthrown before him. You see that right there? So Judas was the first one out there in battle. He would give this courageous speech, and then he would go out there and fight for his life and for the law of God. All right? And so how could you not be stirred up to go and fight with Judas, Maccabeus? All right? And they pursued them from the going down of Beth Horon. So the going down would be the west of Beth Horon, unto the plain, where were slain about 800 men of them, and the residue fled into the land of the Philistines, right? So that lets you know it's the valley. I don't have a map of Israel in the time of the Greeks, but let's just look at the map that we generally use for this, for the land. Let's see if Beth Horon is on there. I don't think it is, but it might be. It's Beth Zur. Don't think it's the same as Beth Horon, but we know that it said the valley, right? And it said the west, so it's heading this way, and they run into the land of the Philistines, right? So it had to be Beth Horon had to be somewhere in here in this valley, or rather, just west of Jerusalem, maybe east central Judah. All right, don't save. They fled into the land of the Philistines. Then began the fear of Judas and his brethren, and an exceeding great dread to fall upon the nations round about them. You see right there? So Judah, not only did Judah's reputation grow within Israel, but also all the other nations are starting to hear about the exploits of Judah, and they're like, oh, we can't just roll up on this guy and kill him easily. This is they started becoming afraid. All right? Insomuch as his fame came into the king, and all nations talked of the battles of Judas. They say, hey, you hear what Judas Maccabeus did? He put Saron and his great army to flight, right? He made them run away. All right. Oh, no, that's not what that is. That's like next chapter. Anyway. Now when King Antiochus heard these things, he was full of indignation. Wherefore he sent and gathered together all the forces of his realm, even a very strong army. So Antiochus said, I'm putting an end to this now. He opened also his treasure, and gave his soldiers pay for a year, commanding them to be ready whensoever he should need them. He's like, look, I'm gonna go ahead and pay you up front. Be ready. Be ready for the call. Nevertheless, when he saw that the money of his treasures failed, and that the tributes in the country were small because of the dissension and plague which he had brought upon the land in taking away the laws which had been of old time, right? So, not only is the judgment of the Greeks coming upon the people, again, it's Deuteronomy 28, it's Leviticus 26, right? So that speaks of diseases coming upon the people as well. So that's coming from God as well. So now, the taxes are not being paid like what Antiochus expects. And now he just paid his men for a year. He's running low on funds. All right. He feared that he should not be able to bear the charges any longer, nor to have such gifts to give so liberally as he did before, for he had abounded above the kings that were before him. Right. So he was not good in handling his money. Wherefore, being greatly perplexed in his mind, he determined to go into Persia, there to take the tributes of the countries and to gather much money. So he left Lysias, a nobleman, and one of the blood royal, to oversee the affairs of the king from the river Euphrates unto the borders of Egypt. Right. So he said, Lysias, watch over this area right here from Euphrates to Egypt, because again, that's the promised land. That's specifically the land that was promised to Abraham, was from the Euphrates to the Nile. All right. And to bring up his son Antiochus until he came again. He said, I'm going to Persia to collect money, to collect taxes, take care of the Jews for me. All right. And watch my son. Moreover, he delivered unto him the half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him charge of all things that he would have done, as also concerning them that dwelt in Judah and Jerusalem. He said, look, wipe out them Jews. Judea is rising up. Stop them. You know, they got this guy named Judas Maccabeus who's doing all this and that. Stop him. To wit, that he should send an army against them to destroy and root out the strength of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem, and to take away their memorial from that place. Right? So he's saying, look, destroy the temple, destroy Jerusalem, and that he should place strangers in all their quarters and divide their land by lot. He said, look, we're getting all the Jews out of there, and we're splitting up the land. So the king took the half of the forces that remained and departed from Antioch, his royal city, the 147th year. So this is a year or maybe even a few months after Mattathias died. So this isn't taking a long time. The Judas, once he took over, he took over. All right. And having passed the river Euphrates, he went through the high countries, right? The mountainous countries. Then Lysias chose Ptolemy, the son of Dorimenes, Nicanor, and Gorgias, mighty men of the king's friends. Remember Nicanor. Nicanor is very important, at least to the story of Judah Maccabee. And with them he sent 40,000 footmen and 7,000 horsemen to go into the land of Judah and to destroy it, as the king commanded. So they went forth with all their power, and came and pitched by Emmaus in the plain country. And the merchants of the country, hearing the fame of them, took silver and gold very much with servants, and came into the camp to buy the children of Israel for slaves. A power also of Syria and of the land of the Philistines joined themselves unto them. All right. So here you have 40,000 plus coming to fight against the Israelites, coming to fight against Judea and to take the people for slaves. Now when Judas and his brethren saw that miseries were multiplied, and that the forces did encamp themselves in their borders, for they knew how the king had given commandment to destroy the people and utterly abolish them, they said one to another, let us restore the decayed fortune of our people, and let us fight for our people and the sanctuary. Then was the congregation gathered together, that they might be ready for battle, and that they might pray and ask mercy and compassion. You see that right there? So it's not enough to be ready to fight. You got to pray to the Lord for mercy, right? Remember in the days of Onias, the story of Heliodorus. What caused the angels to come down and to beat the hell out of Heliodorus? It was the prayers of the people. It was the fasting of the people. It was the people calling upon the Lord. All right. So then the Lord came down with two angels and fought for the people. Now Jerusalem lay void as a wilderness. There was none of her children that went in or out. The sanctuary also was trodden down, and aliens kept the stronghold. The heathen had their habitation in that place, and joy was taken from Jacob, and the pipe with the harp ceased. There was no joy left in the city. The city was run down by the Greeks. All right. They looked at Jerusalem, and these were people who were alive during the days of Onias. They saw the prosperity of Jerusalem, and now they're seeing it run down by the enemies. Wherefore the Israelites assembled themselves together and came to Maspha over against Jerusalem. For in Maspha was the place where they prayed aforetime in Israel. You see that right there? So that was a holy place, was Maspha. All right, one of the suburbs of Jerusalem. Then they fasted that day, and put on sackcloth, and cast ashes upon their heads, and rent their clothes, and laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. You see that right there? So first of all, that tells you that the people who initially drew the images that were in the Bible, because yes, the Bible did have images in it, it tells you that the people who originally wrote the Bible did not look like the Greeks, because why would the Greeks have to paint over it? All right, it's the same thing as the whitewashing that happened through Europe. where you had like the Voronoi, which they didn't necessarily get to, but you had people whitewashing all the images of the prophets and people that came before time in specifically throughout Europe, but also in parts of the Middle East. All right. They brought also the priest's garments and the first fruits and the tithes, and the Nazarites they stirred up, who had accomplished their days. Then cried they with a loud voice toward heaven, saying, What shall we do with these? And whither shall we carry them away? For thy sanctuary is trodden down and profaned, and thy priests are in heaviness and brought low. And lo, the heathen are assembled together against us to destroy us. What things they imagine against us, thou knowest. How shall we be able to stand against them, except thou, O God, be our help? Then sounded they with trumpets and cried with a loud voice. And after this, Judas ordained captains over the people, even captains over thousands, over hundreds, and over fifties, and over tens. But as for such as were building houses, or had betrothed wives, or were planting vineyards, or were fearful, those he commanded that they should return, every man to his own house, according to the law. So the camp removed and pitched upon the south side of Emmaus. So Judah is doing exactly what the law said to do here, right? So in Exodus 18, you had Moses ordain leaders of the people, leaders of the army of Israel, right? And all the people, these are all the people who are exempt from war, according to the law. The people who are building houses, or getting ready to be married, or they just started planting a vineyard, or they just plowed the field, they're about to get ready to plant the vineyard, or were fearful. He said, look, we don't want no scaredy cats with us anyway. Y'all go home too. All right. And Judah said, Arm yourselves and be valiant men, and see that ye be in readiness against the morning, that ye may fight with these nations that are assembled together against us to destroy us and our sanctuary. For it is better for us to die in battle than to behold the calamities of our people in our sanctuary. Nevertheless, as the will of God is in heaven, so let him do. Right? So what a cliffhanger to end it on. All right, you have about ready to go into this battle. These maybe hundreds, maybe a couple thousand with Judah Maccabeus and his family. And then on the other side, you got 40,000 plus of these heathen who have gathered together against Jerusalem, who are trying to destroy it. All right, trying to destroy the holy city, and all the people, take all the people as slaves and sell them hither and yon, right? So here you literally have a battle of the righteous versus the wicked.